In 1954, the United States government overthrew the democratically elected president of Guatemala. The official reason? He was a communist threat to the Western Hemisphere. The real reason? He had tried to take back land from a fruit company. Not an oil company, not a weapons manufacturer, not a bank. A company that sold bananas. A company whose product you can buy today for about 20 cents. A company that, at the height of its power, owned more land in Central America than some European nations owned in Europe, maintained its own private army, controlled its own railroad network, operated its own telegraph system, and had enough political influence in Washington to get the United States military to do its bidding. The United Fruit Company. And the banana republic it created wasn't a metaphor. It was a business model. What if bananas had never existed, not just as a fruit, as the commodity that invented a new form of corporate power, one that is still being replicated today in ways that most people never see? The fruit that shouldn't have survived. Here's something almost nobody knows about the banana you buy at the supermarket. It's a clone. Every Cavendish banana, the variety that makes up virtually 100% of the global export market, is genetically identical to every other Cavendish banana on Earth. They are not grown from seeds. They are propagated vegetatively, meaning each new plant is a cutting from an existing plant, which was itself a cutting, which was itself a cutting, going back generations. There is no sexual reproduction, no genetic variation, no natural defense against diseases that evolve. This was not always the case. Until the 1950s, the banana that dominated world trade was a different variety called the Gros Michel. Bigger, creamier, with a richer flavor that people who remember it describe as genuinely superior to what we eat today. The Gros Michel was also a clone, and in the 1950s, a soil fungus called Fusarium oxysporum, Panama disease, swept through the global banana industry and destroyed it. Plantation after plantation across Central America, the Caribbean, and West Africa was wiped out. The Gros Michel went commercially extinct within a decade. Here is a strange footnote to that extinction. The artificial banana flavor in candy, ice cream, and chewing gum, the flavor that people often say smells nothing like a real banana, was developed to mimic the Gros Michel, not the Cavendish. The Cavendish has a different chemical profile. So when you eat a banana-flavored candy and think it smells artificial and wrong, it isn't wrong. It's accurate. It smells like a banana that no longer exists. A ghost flavor of a fruit that was eaten into extinction by a fungus. The industry switched to the Cavendish, which was resistant to that particular strain of Panama disease. And then, in the 1990s, a new strain appeared, Tropical Race 4. It attacks Cavendish. It spreads through soil, through water, through contaminated equipment. It cannot be stopped with fungicides. It has already devastated plantations across Asia, Australia, the Middle East, and Africa. It is spreading toward Latin America, the heart of global banana production. The banana industry knows this. It has known it for 30 years, and it has not fundamentally solved the problem, because solving it would require abandoning the monoculture that makes industrial banana production profitable. We are watching the potential extinction of the commercial banana in slow motion. And we have been here before. How a fruit built an empire. To understand how a banana company came to control the fate of nations, you have to understand what Central America looked like in the 1870s. The region was poor, politically unstable, and almost entirely undeveloped in the economic sense that European and American investors understood. There were no railroads, there were no modern ports. The interior was dense jungle, crossed by rivers and mud tracks. The governments were weak, the institutions fragile, and the elite families who controlled politics were perpetually in need of foreign capital. Into this walked miner Cooper Keith, an American entrepreneur who, in 1871, began building a railroad in Costa Rica. The Costa Rican government wanted a rail connection to the coast, but couldn't afford to build it. Keith agreed to build it in exchange for land grants, enormous tracts of territory along the railroad route, and a lease on the railroad itself. To make the land grants profitable while the railroad was under construction, Keith started growing bananas along the route. The bananas sold well in the United States. He grew more. The railroad got built. The banana business got bigger. By the time Keith merged his operations with the Boston Fruit Company in 1899 to create the United Fruit Company, the template was established. Build infrastructure that governments couldn't afford, take land as payment, grow bananas on the land, ship them north on the infrastructure you built, and repeat. In each country, the company ended up owning the railroads, the telegraph lines, the ports, and millions of acres of the best agricultural land. The government needed the company more than the company needed the government. This gave United Fruit a kind of power that no corporation had exercised before. In Honduras, the company's banana revenues at peak production exceeded the revenues of the Honduran government. In Guatemala, United Fruit owned 42% of the country's land and controlled the only railroad and the only major Atlantic port. In Costa Rica, in Colombia, in Panama, in the Dominican Republic, the same pattern. Infrastructure, land, monopoly, leverage. The company didn't just control economies, it helped create countries. In 1903, when Panamanian separatists wanted to break away from Colombia and the United States wanted a canal route, United Fruit's railroad across the isthmus became the critical logistical piece. The company's infrastructure made the Panamanian Revolution possible. When Colombia sent troops to suppress the rebellion, they arrived to find United Fruit's railroad, the only practical route across the isthmus, unavailable to them. The revolution succeeded in 3 days. Panama became an independent nation. The canal got built. United Fruit got preferred trade terms. A fruit company helped create a country. Because it needed the railroad contract, the term Banana Republic was coined in 1904 by the American writer O. Henry, who had lived in Honduras while hiding from embezzlement charges in the United States. He used it to describe exactly what he saw, a nation whose political life was entirely subordinated to the commercial interests of a foreign fruit company. It was meant as satire. It was actually journalism. But United Fruit's power was not only economic. When workers on its Colombian plantations went on strike in 1928, demanding written contracts, 8-hour workdays, and the right not to be forced to shop at company stores, the company requested that the Colombian government intervene. The workers' demands were not radical. They were the basic labor rights that workers in the United States and Europe had already won. In Colombia, on a banana plantation, they were grounds for a massacre. On the night of December 5th, soldiers surrounded the banana workers gathered in the central square of Ciénaga and opened fire. The official Colombian government report counted 47 dead. Eyewitness accounts and subsequent historical research suggest the number was far higher, possibly in the hundreds, with bodies loaded onto freight trains and dumped in the sea. Gabriel Garcia Marquez, who was born in the Banana Zone 2 years after the massacre, grew up hearing stories about it. He put it in 100 Years of Solitude. In the book, the soldiers opened fire on a crowd of 3,000 workers. The government later insists no massacre occurred. The company denies all involvement. The town slowly loses its memory of what happened. Garcia Marquez called it magical realism. The historians call it accurate. The Coup. By the 1950s, United Fruit had been operating in Guatemala for over 50 years. It owned 550,000 acres of land, much of it lying uncultivated as a buffer against future needs. It paid no taxes on its land. It paid its Guatemalan workers wages far below what its workers in the United States received for equivalent work. In 1951, Jacobo Arbenz was elected president with a mandate to modernize the Guatemalan economy. His land reform program expropriated uncultivated land from large estates and redistributed it to landless peasants. United Fruit was offered compensation at the value the company itself had declared on its tax returns, which was vastly below the land's actual market value. United Fruit launched an aggressive lobbying campaign in Washington, arguing that Arbenz was a communist and that Guatemala was becoming a Soviet beachhead. Edward Bernays, the nephew of Sigmund Freud and the father of modern public relations, ran the company's media operation, planting stories in American newspapers and arranging press tours for journalists who returned home writing about the communist threat in Central America. Secretary of State John Foster Dulles had previously worked for a law firm that represented United Fruit. His brother Alan Dulles, director of the CIA, had served on United Fruit's board. In June 1954, the CIA launched Operation PBSUCCESS. It was not primarily a military operation, it was a psychological one. The CIA set up fake radio stations that broadcast fabricated reports of a massive rebel army advancing on the capital. They ran disinformation campaigns, telling Guatemalan military commanders that American air support was coming for whoever sided against Arbenz. They staged bombing runs over Guatemala City, not to destroy anything, but to create panic and the impression that a full-scale war had begun. The actual rebel force numbered fewer than 400 men. It never won a single significant military engagement. But Arbenz, listening to the fake radio broadcasts, watching his own military commanders lose their nerve, believing he faced an overwhelming force he had no hope of defeating, resigned. He had been defeated by a radio station. A military junta took power. The land reform was reversed. United Fruit's land was returned. What followed was not simply a change of government. It was the beginning of a catastrophe. The junta that replaced Arbenz was followed by a succession of military governments, each more brutal than the last, each supported by Washington as a bulwark against communism. In the 1960s, a civil war began between the government and leftist guerrillas. In the 1970s, the violence intensified. In the early 1980s, under the dictatorship of Efraín Ríos Montt, who was later convicted of genocide by a Guatemalan court, the army conducted systematic massacres of indigenous Maya communities suspected of supporting the guerrillas. Entire villages were destroyed. 440 communities were wiped off the map. The United Nations Truth Commission later concluded that acts of genocide had been committed. The Civil War ended in 1996. Approximately 200,000 people had been killed. 45,000 more had been disappeared, taken by security forces and never seen again. Roughly 1 million people had been displaced from their homes. All of this because a fruit company didn't want to pay fair taxes on land it wasn't even using. The Banana Today United Fruit no longer exists under that name. After years of antitrust pressure, political scandals, and the devastating blow of Panama disease, the company reinvented itself as Chiquita Brands International in 1984. The rebranding was cosmetic. The business model was not entirely different. In 2001, Chiquita was fined $25 million by the United States Department of Justice for making payments to a Colombian paramilitary organization designated as a terrorist group, the AUC, in exchange for protection of its banana operations. The payments continued for years after the company's own lawyers told executives they were illegal. The fine was $25 million. Chiquita's annual revenue that year was approximately $3 billion. The math is not complicated. The banana industry today is dominated by 5 companies: Chiquita, Dole, Del Monte, Fifes, and Bonita, which together control approximately half of global banana exports. Most of the bananas they sell are Cavendish, the clone, grown on massive industrial plantations in Ecuador, Costa Rica, Colombia, and the Philippines. The workers on these plantations earn wages that make a mockery of the price you pay for a banana in a Western supermarket. A bunch of bananas that retails for $1.50 in an American grocery store generates about 2 cents in wages for the workers who grew, harvested, and packed it. The rest goes to shippers, importers, ripening facilities, supermarkets, and corporate profits. The banana is the most consumed fruit on Earth. Americans alone eat around 27 pounds of bananas per person per year. Globally, approximately 100 billion bananas are consumed annually. It is everywhere, cheap, taken entirely for granted. And the system that delivers it is built on the same foundations that miner Cooper Keith laid in the 1870s. Foreign control of land and infrastructure, political leverage over weak governments, labor costs suppressed to the minimum the market will bear, and a monoculture so efficient and so fragile that the entire thing could collapse if the wrong fungus reaches the wrong plantation at the wrong time. The fruit that invented corporate power. The Banana Republic is supposed to be history, a relic of the early 20th century when the rules were different and corporations could do things that are no longer acceptable. Except the rules were not as different as we like to think, and the things corporations do have changed less than the names we give them. United Fruit built railroads and took land as payment. Modern corporations build digital infrastructure and take data as payment. United Fruit controlled the communications networks of the countries it operated in, the telegraph lines, the shipping routes, the information that moved between governments and markets. Modern technology companies control the communications infrastructure of virtually every country on Earth. The information that moves through their systems is more valuable than anything United Fruit ever shipped. In 2016, the European Commission ordered Apple to repay 13 billion euros in back taxes to Ireland, taxes Apple had avoided through a sweetheart deal with the Irish government that gave the company an effective tax rate of less than 1% on its European profits. Ireland initially refused to collect the money. A government fought in court for years to protect a corporation's right not to pay it taxes. United Fruit would have understood this arrangement immediately. Amazon has negotiated agreements with multiple American states and cities that gave the company billions of dollars in tax incentives and subsidies in exchange for locating facilities there, agreements that effectively transferred public money to a private company in exchange for the promise of employment. The leverage was identical to United Fruit's. We will bring economic activity to your territory, but only on our terms. United Fruit operated in countries whose governments were too weak to regulate it effectively. Modern corporations have become expert at choosing jurisdictions that cannot or will not regulate them, routing profits through Ireland, the Cayman Islands, Luxembourg, Singapore, wherever the tax burden is lightest and the regulatory scrutiny weakest. This is not evasion, it is planning. The distinction exists in law. In practice, it is difficult to see. The Banana Republic was not an aberration. It was a proof of concept. It demonstrated that a private company with sufficient economic power could operate as a sovereign entity, making its own rules, enforcing its own order, and using state power as a tool rather than a constraint. The lesson was learned. It has been applied ever since. Finale. A world without bananas. No United Fruit Company, no Banana Republic, no template for corporate sovereignty over weak states. Guatemala's history without the 1954 coup is unimaginably different. No 42 years of civil war, no 200,000 dead, a different Central America, a different relationship between the United States and Latin America. No Panamanian Revolution staged with a railroad as a logistical weapon. The specific form of corporate imperialism that United Fruit pioneered might have emerged from some other commodity, but it emerged from this one, in this way, at this moment, and the world it created is the world we live in. One fruit, 20 cents. But here is what the history of the banana actually tells us. We tend to think of corporate power as a modern problem, something that emerged with Silicon Valley and globalization and the financialization of the economy. The banana tells us it is not. The mechanisms of corporate sovereignty, controlling infrastructure, owning land, leveraging political connections, suppressing labor costs, and using the indispensability of your product as a shield against accountability, were perfected over a century ago by a company that sold fruit. The Banana Republic is not a place. It is a set of arrangements between private power and public authority. It has existed under many names, in many industries, on every continent. Look at your banana. 20 cents. Ask yourself, who paid the rest of the price?